So the Dutch Grand Prix was on yesterday, and in reaction to that I always do some videos kind of going over the biggest talking points really after these events. Now this obviously was the first race after the summer break. There's been about 4 weeks or so for the cars and the drivers, well, the cars to get upgraded and the drivers to have some rest and kind of take stock of how things were in the first 14 rounds of the season and kind of push on from there. Now for me the main talking point really was how dominant in the end Lando Norris was in this race. I mean, he won by such a huge margin. Now, with that in mind, I wanted to ask, should Red Bull and Max Verstappen be worried about this? Well, I think Red Bull should definitely be worried about it. Max Verstappen's a bit more of a murky situation really, and I'll explain why in this video in a bit, but let's focus on the thing that I think without a doubt is a concern, and it was already a concern for Red Bull coming into this race, but it definitely is after as well. You have to look at the Constructors' Championship for this, because the main attention for fans is the Drivers' Champion. You know, you always think about the guys who win the championship, and that isn't always the one who wins the Constructors' Championship. You know, there's the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors, but the Constructors is the important one to the teams because that is where the money's paid out. You know, you could have, for example, Max Verstappen in 2021 where he won the Drivers' Championship, but Mercedes won the Constructors' Championship. From a team point of view, that was a good season. But obviously Verstappen took all the headlines because he won his first Drivers' Championship. But that's not where the money's paid. The money is handed out depending on whether you finish in the Constructors' Championship. The prestige is more about the Drivers' Championship, I'd say, on kind of like a promotional kind of global level and stuff like that. But when it comes down to the cold hard cash, that's where the Constructors' Championship is. And the gap has gone down between Red Bull and McLaren down to 30 points now. And in theory, that gap could, evaporate completely at the Italian Grand Prix. I don't think it will, because I think Red Bull are scoring well enough to hold off McLaren. But for me, I think that McLaren really are the favourites now at this point. And for the Constructors, I mean, they've been the bookies' favourites for the Constructors for some time now. That is not news at all. And you look at the form of how that gap has been reducing. It's been reducing consistently now for a good while. Red Bull have not won a race since Max Verstappen won the Spanish Grand Prix. It's now been 6 races since they won a race, which, that's not great from a team that's looking to win the Constructors' Championship. So for me, Red Bull should be without a doubt very concerned and very worried for the Constructors' Championship. I think that is probably going to go to McLaren as things are. Yeah, I mean, maybe the upgrades have worked for Red Bull, but they haven't really improved the car that much compared to what it was before, certainly compared to the McLaren. And I think that if Oscar Piastri got by Charles Leclerc, I think he would have been challenging Max Verstappen by the finish, but as it was, he finished in 4th place. But Lando Norris though, I mean, even though he got a poor start, even though he dropped behind Max Verstappen again, which is exactly what happened at the Spanish Grand Prix. But that time, McLaren didn't have the pace, didn't have the strategy to be able to pass Max by the finish. This time they did though. Lando Norris passed Max Verstappen on, what was it, like 15 or something like that, and pulled out a 22-second gap by the finish. That is as dominant as Max was in the Bahrain Grand Prix and the Japanese Grand Prix. When he was really just miles clear of everybody, and Red Bull were looking absolutely certain for another double, another Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. So they should absolutely be concerned about that. But what about the Drivers' Championship? What about the Drivers' Championship? Because this is where things get a little less certain in my opinion, because there is still a 70-point gap between Verstappen and Norris. And for me, I think it's too early to tell whether they should be too worried about this. And I say that because McLaren seems to be very dominant around high downforce, low speed circuits in Formula 1. They were very dominant in both Hungary and the Netherlands, but around higher speed tracks, it was Mercedes that won. Austria, Britain, Belgium. What's coming up next? Monza, high-speed circuit. We've got Baku, that's a high-speed circuit. We've got Mexico, high-speed circuit. Qatar, high-speed circuit. Las Vegas, high-speed circuit. Even Abu Dhabi is quite a high-speed circuit these days. So for me, the proof will have to be in the Italian pudding in a week's time. How McLaren do there is going to be key, because for me, if Mercedes win in Monza, which they could do, You know, with how they've been at high-speed circuits recently, that will mean that even though Red Bull aren't winning, it'll mean that Mercedes are getting the lion's share of points and therefore making the most ground up. And Mercedes are so far back in the constructors that I don't really see them threatening Red Bull. I don't see, even if Mercedes winning Monza, Baku, Las Vegas, Mexico, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, like I mentioned, I don't think that'll be enough. I don't think that'll be enough because Red Bull are still going to be in there. You know, Max Verstappen just needs to keep getting podiums and he'll win the championship this year. It doesn't matter what. Lando Norris can win every single race. But as long as Max Verstappen's on the podium every time and with a few seconds in there, he's still going to win the championship. So for me, it is far from panic stations yet when it comes to Lando Norris and Max Verstappen in the drivers, but in the Constructors' Championship, the panic button should be pressed at this point. I think Red Bull are going to start to get a bit desperate because if they lose that Constructors' Championship, heads will roll. And I think one of those heads that will roll will be Sergio Perez, but we'll see what happens with all that. What are your guys' thoughts on this? Who's going to win the Constructors' Championship this season? Who's going to win the Drivers' Championship? And should Red Bull be concerned by the pace of McLaren and more particularly the pace of Lando Norris as well? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for much more F1 content, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and ring the bell as well for much more F1 news right here on the Formula1Chronicle.com.